فلذلك فادع واستقم كما أمرت ولا تتبع أهواءهم وقل آمنت بما أنزل الله من كتاب.
الحمد لله وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah, we'll get started today. We're in the new section, which is the book of Salah and the Mutn Abi Shujaa. And this is a very important chapter. And of course, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that Bunyan Islam ala khams, that the Prophet ﷺ said that Islam is built upon 5. And of course, the first of them, which is the Shahadatain, this is something we study in Aqidah. And then the next of them, he says, wa iqam salah وإيتاء الزكاة والحج وصوم Ramadan. So he says, and the next one after the Shahada is the establishing of the prayer. And so this is why the rest of the book will come up with these last pillars of Islam here, and then we'll go into other things inshallah after that. But of course, I'm starting off with Salah, and of course, Salah is of the most important things that we have in our life, that we need to make sure that we are taking care of it, and that we're being keen to never let anything come between us and the Salah. And so it's very important for us to to protect the Salah in whatever we do, and of course that we make sure our life revolves around the Salah. As the Salah comes in these different times, and that we make sure that in our life that we are constantly putting into consideration, well, how am I going to pray this next prayer? You know, am I making sure that I go to sleep and to where I'm able to wake up for Fajr, and these things, of course. So this is very important for us to make this the biggest part of our life. And so going into what the author here he brings out and what he talks about, the first thing he talks about is the times. And so he says, Kitab al-Salah, as-salatul mafrudatu khamsun. And so of course he says that there's 5 obligatory Salah, like mafruda, which is like the Salah that's made obligatory or fard. And so he says here, then he says the first of them, and he says az-zuhr وأولها وأول وقتها زوال الشمس وآخره إذا صار الظل كل شيء مثله بعد ظل الزوال. And so then he talks about the timing for each one of these. So he says dhuhr, and I added here 4 rak'ahs, and that's something that we all know, but of course some of the new Muslims, maybe they need this. So it says so dhuhr is the first of them, and of course the reason he starts with dhuhr is because there's a long hadith that comes where the Prophet ﷺ was led in Salah by Jibreel alayhi salam. So Jibreel came to him and he led him in Salah, and the first of the Salat that he led him in was dhuhr. So in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ was led by Jibreel in Salah, and so Jibreel had him pray these Salah at the beginning of the time, the first time that he came to him, and then at the next one, then he had him pray most of the salawat towards the end of the time. And so this is Jibreel taught the Prophet ﷺ what time to pray these salah. And so of course, since the hadith started with dhuhr, he starts with dhuhr. And so this is what the author here, he starts with, and some of the other scholars, they also start with dhuhr as the first one, and not necessarily fajr. And so he says that its time starts at the zenith of the sun, and the zenith is once you have that solar noon. A little bit after the solar noon is the zenith, when the sun is at its highest point in the sky for that day, which is the solar noon. It's not necessarily 12 o'clock, but it's that noon that is the solar noon. That is when the sun is at its peak. Once it goes a little bit after that, then once it passes that peak, and just a little bit, then the time of the dhuhr enters, and it ends when the shadow of everything, the shadows of everything are the same length as the object minus the shadow of the zenith. So if you can imagine that I have a stick that I put up, and that in this say like this, if I were to have a stick that I pull with me, and this stick, it casts a shadow, and that shadow that is being cast by it, when it's at the solar noon, this shadow that's being cast, it will probably be a small amount of shadow, just depending on the time of the year. If it's like like in the summer, then there probably won't be much of a shadow at all. But if it's in the winter, then the shadow will be longer. And you guys that are in Seattle, you would have a much longer shadow in these times than other times. But depending on the placement of the people, there'll always be a shadow at noontime. But when, say in the winter, at noontime, there may be a shadow. This shadow is you're gonna use this length later on when it comes into asr, but the shadow of everything is the same, but the end of this time is when the shadows of everything are the same length as the object minus the shadow of the zenith. So if I were to put this in the ground, it's kind of like imagine a sundial. If I were to put this in the ground and then I were to see the length of it going this way, I would say once everything is the same length as this, then the time of Dhuhr has entered. And this is subtracting the amount of the same length as the object minus the shadow of the zenith. So you take like this extra shadow and you take this into account at the end of this. And so this is what's important. So of course you take you take the amount of shadow that was there at the solar noon and you subtract that from the shadow of the zenith, and then that will be the time of asr when it comes in. And that's one way to say if you don't have a clock or something of this sort. And so you can actually see a lot of times if you look at something that's like a standing pole or something, you can see the shadow, and the shadow itself will tell you when the time has come in or when there's not any time that's left as well. And so this is, of course, every single salah except for the between Fajr and Dhuhr, it ends, the time for the salah ends when the next one comes in. So the next one comes in, there's like a moment where the next one changes, and then that's the end of that time. And so here he gives this this explanation for Dhuhr, and this is from the solar noon until the shadows of something minus the shadow that was there at that time is the same length as its object that's standing up. And so then the next one he says here is, he says in wal asr, he says here wal asr wa awwal waqtiha az-ziyadatu ala dhill al-mithli wa akhiruhu fi al-ikhtiyari ila dhill al-mithlaini wa fi al-jawazi ila ghurub ash-shams. And so here he says in asr, the beginning of its time, and as for asr, its time starts when the shadow exceeds the length of the object, when it exceeds that length of the object, as we talked about that, and of course taking into consideration what we subtracted from the amount of shadow that was there because of the placement of the earth and whatnot, taking that into consideration there. So when the shadow exceeds the length of the object, and then he says, and its preferred time. And so there's multiple times when we pray, but its preferred time, like the best time, this time ends when the shadows are double the length of the object. And this comes from a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ, that he would pray this before the sun would turn that like orangish, that really orangish color. And this is something the Prophet ﷺ used to pray before the sun would become orange, and it would still be that yellowish, or very bright and strong in the sky when you pray asr. So it's good to pray it in the beginning of that time before it changes its color, and especially before it goes into like the red before sunset, as this is a time that's disliked for someone to pray. So by dislike, that means that this person doesn't get any reward for their time of the salah. Like, of course, the salah has its own reward, but like the timing, they lose any reward for coming towards it at the beginning. And of course, in general, it's best for people to go as fast as they are, like to pray the prayer at the beginning of its time is always the best. So this is something someone should keep in mind when they are praying, is that they should try to make it at the beginning of their time, if they can, as long as they know that the time is coming, of course. And so here, and this is also something you may encounter some people that they pray asr later, and this is something that like the Hanafis, they have a different calculation method, but this is something that sometimes they will actually fall in the beginning of their time, actually falls in at the very end of the preferred time, and actually enters into the time of karaha, which is the time that's disliked. But if you do find yourself in a place where you don't have any masjid except someone that prays Hanafi at that time, go ahead and pray with them. That's better than not. That's better than praying by yourself in that case. But of course, it's best to pray all of these prayers at the beginning of their times. And so then the next one, so he says here, and then the time starts when the shadow exceeds the length of the object, and its preferred time ends. So it ends when the shadows are double the length of the object, and the end of its permissible time is sunset. So of course, like the permissible time is the time you're allowed to pray this in. And so sunset, if you haven't prayed it, this is of course, that's the end of the time for Asr. And so he brings some of these different times, and of course, like there's a time that's the best time for someone to pray, which is the beginning of it, which is the Waqt al-Fadila, which is like, this is the time when it's the best for someone to pray, is just at the very beginning. And then al-Ikhtiyar is like the good time that kind of lasts for a little bit, and this is the beginning of these things. And this is the preferred time, as I mentioned here. And then there's also Waqt al-Jawaz, which is like it's permissible for you to pray in this, and I mentioned this is the time when it's permissible until the end of Maghrib in this time, or that would be in other prayers, but here it's also Waqt al-Kiraha, because this is something that is disliked for you to pray in this time, or like to wait and to make it late for Asr in this particular scenario, because Asr, there's certain hadith that come that show that this is not the time that the Prophet ﷺ used to pray it, and he would pray it before then, and he also called people to pray it before that. And so that would be the waqt of karaha, and that this means that the timing in itself, you don't get any reward for coming at it at that time. You lose the reward for coming towards that at that time. And then there's also waqt al-hurma, which is like when it's haram to pray this, and this is if you don't have enough time for you to pray the salah. Like if there's only like maybe like half a minute left between the next salah coming in, yeah, you need to pray. But this is something that at that time it becomes like the timing that you are praying in is haram, because you can't finish the whole salah in that time that's amounted. And also there's the time of idrak or durura, is like if you like wake up or something and you just make tayammum or something of this sort, like if you don't have water and whatnot, and you are able to say Allahu Akbar before the end of the time. Then if you're able to say Allahu Akbar, then you need to pray the salah, and you make sure that you start the salah before the time ends. And this is like the time where you actually make it inside of the time of that prayer. Now, of course, no one should ever delay their prayer purposefully. This is something that someone should always be careful. Hafidhu ala salawat, and that you should always protect. And like this word hafidhu, it has like this exaggeration in protecting and making sure that you're protecting all of your salat, with of course coming with tahara and all of the other things that is entailed by that. And so Asr, this is the time for Asr, and it has a couple of these differences here. But of course, at the beginning of the time, it's the time that's the best, before if we have like this stick and we're to put it down, before it becomes two lengths. So if I were to put it down on the ground, I'd see one, and I'd see two. And if the length of the shadow was more than this two, then the time for the preferred time has ended. And then the next one he says here is وَالْمَغْرِبْ وَوَقْتُهَا وَاحِدٌ وَهُوَ غُرُوبُ الشَّمْسِ وَمِقْدَارُ مَا يُؤَذِّنُ وَيَتَوَضَّعُ وَيَسْتُرُ الْعَوْرَةَ وَيُقِيمُ الصَّلَاةَ وَيُصَلِّي خَمْسَ رَكَعَاتٍ. And so he says here Maghrib. He says Maghrib has a single time, and it is when the sun sets, and the last time for someone to make and the time for someone to make wudu and cover their awrah, make iqamah and pray 5 rakat. So if you were to put this all together, so the time that someone can make wudu after the adhan, so it's the time for someone to make the adhan, to make wudu, and also to cover their awrah, and to pray khamsa rak'at. So it's like, so they can pray 5 rak'at. And this time is the time that the author here, he says this is the single time for Maghrib. So once Maghrib comes in, then they should right away make the adhan, and then also like all of the time that it takes for this, which is around 20 minutes, and then they would need to pray right away. And then once that time ends, which is around like 20-some minutes, then the time for Maghrib has ended. And this is the view that Imam Shafi'i he had in his new madhab. So like he has a madhab where he was in Baghdad before, and he had a lot of views and opinions. And then when he had his when he came to Egypt, after he went from Baghdad and he came to Egypt, he reassessed his views, and so the things that were from before, he said, I've come back from those other views, and so his the views that we hold on to as his madhab are the ones that come from the new madhab, which are the ones where he revamped and re-looked at all of the different evidences, and he came up with different opinions. Not all of everything he changed his mind about, but there were some things that he would change. And so like the new madhab, which is called al-Jadid, is like when he was here in Egypt to the end of his life. And then before he was in Baghdad, and this is old madhab. In his old madhab, he said that that Maghrib, it goes until the color of the sky, until that red in the sky leaves. And this is something that when the scholars, they look at the hadith, the scholars of the Shafi'i madhab, they say this is actually the strongest, this is the stronger view when we look at the hadith. That this actually is the view that like the evidence holds more weight to. So the majority of the madhab, they went to that this is the stronger view, and they held on to the view that was from his old madhab. And in his new madhab, he said it was only this small period of time. And the reason for that is because the hadith that I mentioned of Jibril, when he had all of these salah, and he had the Prophet ﷺ pray at the beginning of the time, and then he had him pray towards the end of the time at each one of these. In this particular scenario for Maghrib, he had him pray at the exact same time. He didn't change the time to that. And so what we could take from that is that this is the preferred time for someone to pray it at the beginning and not to wait into that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this is not permissible to pray. And this is something that the majority of the scholars are not upon the view of the new madhab, where it has this single time where it has to pray at the first 20-25 minutes of Maghrib. But rather he can pray inside of Maghrib until the redness in the sky, if you ever see the sky and it has this reddish hue, when this red hue leaves the sky, then this is the time that Isha has come in. And so he'll talk about that inshallah. And so then he says here, وَالْعِشَاءُ وَأَوْلُ وَقْتِهَا إِذَا غَابَ الشَّفَقُ الْأَحْمَرُ وَآخِرُهُ فِي الْاخْتِيَارِ إِلَى ثُلُثِ اللَّيْلِ وَفِي الْجَوَازِ إِلَى طُلُوعِ الْفَجْرِ الثَّانِي. And so here he says, and Isha is the time, this time starts when the red leaves the sky from the sunset, and its preferred time ends at 1/3 of the night, and its permissible time ends at the break of Fajr. And so here he gives some different of these times, if you remember the different times that I mentioned before. He just says, so it's time, it starts when that red hue leaves the sky from the sunset. And normally when there's the sunset, there'll be red that's still in the sky, and you'll have this red that's kind of there until that leaves. This is the beginning of Isha. And of course, like the clocks that we have, that we use to like calculate and whatnot, these clocks sometimes they have a difference when this actually comes, because you have the cities that their light pollution sometimes will mess with your ability to see what is the actual if there's still light there, if there's not light still in the sky. And so sometimes it can be a little hard for you to tell exactly. But just like following these calculations in general these are good for the most part, unless you see anything that is very clear to you that the calculation is not right. Then it's okay for you to use these, especially since the times of that we're in these days, and pretty much nobody can see the sky without any light pollution. So we won't actually be able to tell exactly when that came in, but following the schedules that you have that are from like I think the Americans Association, this is also, for the most part, this is very good, or following any of the other calculation methods, whether it's the calculation method of Mecca, the way that they calculate, this is normally good. And sometimes for Fajr, there will be, we'll talk about this in the next one, sometimes there's a little more difference of opinion with Fajr, but the American calculation method is great for Fajr. And so he says here, this is when that red leaves the sky, and then he says the end of the time that's preferred is at 1/3 of the night. And some of the scholars said no, it's actually like the midnight, the solar midnight. So when half the night has gone by, or like that solar midnight from the time of Maghrib, if you break the time of Maghrib until the break of dawn, if you were to break this in half and then cut it, and then this would be that time that's best for you to pray before then. And then and this is also because the Prophet ﷺ, in general, he prayed at the beginning of the times, and there was an exception when it comes to Isha, that one night he delayed it for a reason, and then when the people were done with their prayer, he said that if it weren't that it would make things hard on the people, then he would have made it at the Salah at this time, at this later time. So this is, and then the hadith, it's kind of around almost around midnight is the time that it points to. So this is what some of the scholars said. This is the end of the best time, and that someone should pray in. And also, like, it's permissible. He says here in the time of its permissible time, it ends at the break of Fajr. So of course, when one Fajr, and he says a Fajr Thani. And he says here in Arabic, which is like the second Fajr, which he means by this Fajr Thani is, he means that there's a Fajr where it seems like there's a break of dawn, and of course someone has to be out in a place without light pollution to see this, but there'll be light that comes up that's just like a straight light before Fajr, and it goes up straight into the sky, and then it comes and then it leaves, and then it goes away. And then there's a light that comes up for Fajr, the break of dawn, that comes across the horizon, like kind of like this. And when it comes across this way, this is the true Fajr. This is like what he would say, like here, the second Fajr. And the first Fajr is the false Fajr, which is the Fajr al-Kadhib, which is the Fajr that someone, maybe if they see this light, they think, oh, Fajr came in, but not yet. And usually it's a small period of time. I haven't seen this personally that I can remember because of the problem of light pollution, and someone needs to be out there out in the wild to see this, away from any cities and the light pollution, and this is kind of hard to do these days. So but when this second Fajr comes in, then this is something they'll see. This is the end of the time of Isha. And of course, like, it's best for someone to never sleep until they have prayed Isha. This is something that they should do, especially if they know that normally they won't be able to wake up before the end. Then they should always make sure that they pray Isha before they go to sleep. And also the next thing that he says here, the last of this, is he says, وَالصُّبْحُ وَأَوْلَ وَقْتِهَا طُلُوعُ الْفَجْرِ الثَّانِي وَآخِرُهُ فِي الْاخْتِيَارِ إِلَى الْإِسْفَارِ وَفِي الْجَوَازِ إِلَى طُلُوعِ الشَّمْسِ. And so he says here, and Fajr, he says Subh. And this is also another name that is for Fajr, is Subh or Fajr. These are two names that are there. And he says here, it begins at the break of dawn, and its preferred time ends when the sky becomes yellow, and its permissible time ends with the sunrise. And so this is something here like Fajr. The Prophet ﷺ, he used to pray Fajr when he would in the darkness, like when it was still dark. Of course, after Fajr has already come in, but when it was still quite dark outside, until like you wouldn't be able to tell, like it's narrated that you wouldn't be able to tell any of the women from each other when they're wrapped up in their hijab and whatnot. No one could tell who's who when they were leaving. No one knew who was what, because it was still very, very dark, and they couldn't differentiate the people when they're leaving the masjid. And so this was understood that the Prophet ﷺ can hear Salah like that. He used to always pray. This was like his norm, that he would pray at the beginning of the time for Fajr, and he would not delay that beginning of the time to where the brightness came out, but rather it was something that the people, when he started, they wouldn't be able to see they wouldn't be able to, like, it was very dark. And then once he was finished, they could figure out if someone was sitting next to him. They would see from, of course this was without lights, but they would see who this person was towards the end of the Salah. And of course this is in that dawn where it was where it'd be quite dark. This is the best of the times to pray after the break of dawn, and not to delay it too much. And he says the preferred time ends. So this time that is the preferred time to pray, it ends when the sky becomes yellow. So when you have that yellowness in the sky, this is the Fajr that it's best for you to pray before this ever comes out. And of course there's a hadith that the hadith that I mentioned before, that the Prophet ﷺ, he used to pray before where it was still dark, they used to pray when it was dark. This is something that's mentioned many times. And there's one hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, asfiru bil fajr, or it's narrated in this way, and this which means to make it, he says here, the isfar is the time that it's not permissible here, or not that it's not permissible, he says it's not preferred. That's the end of it. And so like this hadith is taken by the Hanafis, that they say that it's preferred for someone to wait until there's light in the sky and whatnot, and then they can pray in this. But of course, taking all of the hadith together, we'd see the Prophet ﷺ, he used to pray this all the time. So this is the norm of it, and anything outside of that is not. And so they would understand this, make the Fajr asfiru bil Fajr or bil Subh, because it has more ajr, to make this to pray at this time. They understood this to mean to pray at this beginning of this time. But the Shafi'is and a lot of the others, they will look at this and they say this means to extend. The beginning of the prayer starts here, but to extend the qira'ah, or like the recitation of the prayer, until there's a bit of light in the sky. And so like this is a way to put both of these hadith together, and of course that would be more for someone's ajr. If they were standing in prayer for all of that time, then this is more for ajr than someone who didn't pray for that whole amount of time. But it doesn't mean delay the salah, and Allah knows best. And so this is the 5 times here that he gives here, which are for Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, and Fajr. He gives all of these times, and of course these times, or the end of it, of course, is for Fajr, going back there. The end of the time for Fajr is when the sun actually comes up. And he says Tulu Shams, which is the sunrise. Once the disk of the sun comes up across the horizon, then this is something that is the end of the time of Fajr. And another thing to be noted when it comes to the times, he'll probably go into it, but from the time of Fajr until a little after, from the time of the beginning of the sunrise, from the sunrise until the sun comes above the horizon, it says qadr al-ruh, rumh. And so like the like a spear length on the horizon. This thing that is narrated, this time is something that no one should pray during this time. Of course, if they're praying Fajr and they're late about it, then they pray. This is something they have to pray right away. But they pray it as soon as they can. But for someone to choose to pray, like if they want to pray duha, this time comes after. It's about 13 minutes, as some of the scholars have said. If you want to be 15 minutes on the safe side, okay. But after the sunrise has come in, then you wait at least 13 minutes until the sun has rose on the horizon, this length of a spear. On the spear length, and then you can pray after that in duha if you want to pray. If you want to pray in that time, and that time for duha, it goes until the time of a little bit time before the time of dhuhr, and then at the time of dhuhr, when the sun is at its peak, there's a little time when it's at its actual solar noon. This is something that's not good to pray in that time, and then you wait until it comes into the time of dhuhr, and then you can pray dhuhr at that time. And Allah knows best. Is there any questions that you all have about the times, or anything that was unclear?
I have one question. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
So you said we should not pray 15 minutes after sunrise?
And in that 15, or it's like 13 to 15 minute period from sunrise to that time. Yeah.
Okay. And is the time between Asr and sunset, is it permissible to do voluntary prayers during this time? Because somebody at one point told me it was not, and I was very confused.
Okay. We'll talk about this inshallah, but this is the time the Prophet ﷺ, he said, La salata ba'da al-asr, or this is like that there's no salah after asr. And so this is something that is, there's a general nahi or prohibition of praying any other salah that don't have a previous reason after asr. And then also the Prophet ﷺ, he was found praying after asr one time. And so then when his wife asked him, like, what's this prayer that you're praying? He says, I'm making up the prayer. I was held back from praying this prayer. And it was the sunnah after dhuhr. So he's making it up then. So if you're making up a prayer that is, like say you had a sunnah or something after dhuhr or something, and you're making that up, that's a previous prayer, then this is something that's permissible to do in that time. And some of the scholars have said no. But like in the Mutn Abi Shujaa, if you have a reason to pray this prayer, you can pray that. And also the same like this is if you're entering a masjid, you can always pray the prayer before sitting at any time. As long as you enter the masjid just so you can pray that prayer at that impermissible time, then as long as you don't have that intention, then it's fine to do. Yeah. And if somebody, yeah, there's no actual prayer that is after. There's no prescribed prayer that's after Asr though. And in general, it's a time not to pray, not to pray anything unless there's a previous, unless it's making up a previous prayer, or unless you're praying something like Salat al-Janazah or something of this sort. And the reason for this, which is the same reason before, the Prophet ﷺ also mentioned that this is something that's like the mushrikeen, that they pray to the sun, like the people that worship the sun at this time, and also and the sunset and the sunrise and the sunset. These are two special times for some of the mushrikeen, where they worship like the shaytan or in that way. And so this is something that is special for them. So of course, to not be like them, this is the thing that the Prophet ﷺ has prohibited us from that. Allah knows best. And so the next, going on to the next chapter here, he says, Fasl wa shara'itu wujubi salati thalathatu ashya'. And so it goes into the things that make it. He gives a chapter here, and he says there's 3 conditions for salat to be obligatory. And so these are 3 things before someone is obligated to pray the salah, that these 3 conditions need to be met. And these are in general for not just salah. These are in general for everything else as well. But here he gives it for for zakah and all these other things. These are always going to be these need to be met for someone to say that this person is held accountable. So he says the first one is al-Islam. Well, and then the second one, which means he needs to be Muslim, and the second one is bulugh, which is coming of age. Bulugh is like coming of age, and then the third one is aql, and then and also having sanity, like to have his wits about him. And this is, then he says here, wa huwa haddu taklif. And so, and this is like the had, which would be, sometimes it would be like the definition, we would say is the definition. And he says, and these are the conditions, or we can say the conditions of accountability, or taklif, which is the being held accountable for your actions. And to go into Islam, so of course someone needs to be Muslim for them to be obligated to pray. And this is of course this is what it will normally be talked about when we talk about it in fiqh. We'll say that this is a condition for salat to be obligatory, is for them to be a Muslim. Of course, if someone's not Muslim, then they need to become Muslim first before they can pray. And if they become Muslim, then all of their sins from before are put aside. And so, like that, they're not held accountable for any of the sins that came before. And so, some of the scholars, they say that Islam is something that everyone is called to, and everyone also is called to do. Like if somebody, like if a disbeliever, on the day of judgment, when the disbeliever is held accountable, will he be held accountable? This is the discussion. Will he be held accountable for all of the salat that he never prayed? And will he be held accountable for not giving zakah? And he never became a Muslim. And a lot of the scholars will say, yes, he will be held accountable for these things. And this is something that they will be asked about. But here he says this is the condition for it to be obligatory. And the putting it together is like over here we're looking at, for this person to actually pray, he needs to be a Muslim. And over there we're looking at is he going to be punished for not praying? We say yes. So in general, someone wants to become Muslim, all of the previous prayers that they never prayed, it's wiped off their slate. Their slate is clean from here on after becoming a Muslim. So there's no real action that makes a difference of opinion here. And so the second one where he says in bulugh, like coming of age, this is something that happens in a couple different ways. For everybody, any like semen that happens for anyone, whether it's a male or female, whenever semen exits, this is the coming of age. Also for both of them, if they've reached the age of 15 lunar years, not solar years, but lunar years. If they reach the age of 15 years, then they have become of age. And when it comes to, and then for the women themselves, then any time that they reach their first period, then this is their coming of age. They're held accountable from this time. So these are whatever of these things come first, then that's the one that's taken into consideration. So if a kid has a wet dream, all of a sudden now he's held accountable. He needs to make sure that he prays all of his salat in time, because he's going to be held accountable for that, as well as he needs to fast and all of these things. From that first time, then this is the time that this person is now of the age of accountability, and he's taken into account for this. And this doesn't mean that we don't teach the kids to pray and tell them to pray. The Prophet ﷺ commanded us to teach the kids to pray at 7, and then to beat them lightly, of course, nothing hard, if they leave it when they're 10. And of course, this is just with the discipline that a kid should be already, he should know how to pray when he's young. This is some of the things that all of the parents, it's their obligation, and they're obliged to teach their kids how to pray when they're young, and teach them the basics of their deen, so that they know these things. And this is something that is upon the parents to make sure that they have done this. And if the kid always prays when he's 7, and then when he gets to 10, he's already praying, any time after that, he could be coming of age at any time. And so if he already has this built into his system, there's not going to be a problem with him holding on to it. But if he, for some reason, didn't become someone who is like regularly praying, then later it's going to be hard to kind of bring this upon him if he didn't already learn this and get it into himself. And so this is the coming of age. And also, this doesn't mean that we leave our kids before then to just do whatever they want. Of course, there's discipline, and this is something that helps them. Some people, they take this this person is not of age, so we don't need to teach him the deen, or we don't need to teach him to be well behaved. No, of course, like all of these things are things that need to happen, and this doesn't just happen, like the rearing of a kid and making sure he knows what to do doesn't happen at okay, now you're all of a sudden you're accountable now, and you weren't accountable before. This is something that it should be taught in stages. So when they reach this, they are already ready for the accountability that comes. And of course, this comes for the hadith that the Prophet ﷺ, he said that there's 3 people that the pen is lifted from, which is one is the person who is young, and also the person who is insane until he knows what he's saying, and the person who's asleep. And these are things that the pen is not writing. They're bad deeds in these cases. And of course, the kid that does the prayer and whatnot, he also gets the reward for the prayer that he does. And in the Quran that he reads, this is something he gets the reward for. It doesn't mean that he's not like called to do these things and that he doesn't get a reward. It only means that he doesn't get any doesn't get any punishment for the times while he's in his childhood before the bulugh. He doesn't get punished for anything, but he still gets all the rewards for any good things that he does. So of course, and telling them the incentive of reading Quran, praying, all of these things, you're going to get reward for it. And if there's anything that's missing from it or he didn't do it, then this is something he won't get punished for. So it's kind of a win-win scenario, or it's a win without any loss scenario here. So this is what he talks about for the person to be accountable for Salah and for it to be obligatory. And the next thing that he says here is he says that there's also there's five sunnah or congregational prayers, and these are he gives a couple different prayers, and these are for us to pray in congregation. So the first of these, he says here, is for the sunnah congregational prayers, are the 2 Eid prayers. And so he says, وَسُنَّنُ التَّابِعَةُ لِلْفَرَائِضِ سَبْعَ عَشْرَةَ رَكَعَةً. And then he says, رَكَعَةَ الْفَجْرِ. And so, or like, no, he says, الصَّلَوَاتُ وَالْمَسْنُونَاتُ خَمْسٌ الْعِيدَانِ وَالْكُسُوفَانِ وَالْإِسْتِسْقَاءِ. And so he says that the salawats that are also that are sunnah, and he means this in congregation, are the 2 Eid prayers. So we have Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. So these prayers in the morning, which they're normally prayed in the time that we would pray duha, it would come in this time where we pray the 8 prayers. Of course, doing it earlier is better. And so these are the 2 things that we would pray. They're sunnah to pray in the Eid congregation, or to pray this in congregation and whatnot. And this is also something some of the scholars have said it's not sunnah, but rather it's fard. And the difference of opinion goes back to some of the differences in the hadith and whatnot. And of course, the Prophet ﷺ, a general hadith that is relied upon is that the Prophet ﷺ was asked by like a Bedouin. He came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked if I only pray these 5 prayers, is there anything else on me? And the Prophet ﷺ said no, unless you want to do something extra. And so from this, what we get is that these 5 prayers are the only ones that are obligatory. Anything outside of these 5 prayers are something that's not obligatory on the individual. Of course, for someone to pray janazah, this is obligatory for whoever is around there for at least someone to pray. But for the individual, he is only obliged to pray the 5 prayers. And so, there's also the other prayers that happen in congregation, which are these 2 Eid prayers, and we'll talk about them in detail later, inshallah. And then the third one of this, and fourth, is the sun and moon eclipse prayers. And these are also prayers that are prayed like the Eid prayers, and that they have something that's special as well. And we'll talk about that inshallah. They have 2 ruku' in every single rak'ah. So you would stand up and you would pray at the time of the eclipse. This is only during the time of the eclipse. So of course the sun eclipse happens during the daytime, and a moon eclipse happens during the night. So if there's a lunar eclipse during the day, we don't pray that. But there's a prayer for that, for the sun or the moon eclipse, and this happens during the time of the actual eclipse while it's happening. If you can see it with your eyes. So if it's a cloudy day and nobody sees the eclipse, this is something that's not upon the people at that time. And so this is something. There's 2 ruku', as I was saying. There's 2 ruku'. Then so like they would pray like the Fatiha and something that's long to cover the amount of time that they would be in the eclipse, and then they would make a ruku'. And then they would stand up, and then they would recite again. After making the ruku', they would stand up and they recite again. And so there would be 2 of these ruku', then they would make a ruku' for the second time. And then they would stand up, Sami Allahu liman hamida, and then they would do the sujood like a normal prayer. But in the ruku', there'd be 2 in every single rak'ah. And so this is something that's special about the eclipse prayer, and we'll talk about that inshallah in the end of this book of Salah, when he talks about these individual prayers and their details and whatnot. And of course, this should be long and whatnot. And then the fifth of these is wal istisqa, and this is the prayer for rain. The prayer for rain is another one that is prayed in congregation, and this is something that is also this is another sunnah prayer for someone to pray. And this is when there is a drought or something, and we need to ask Allah for rain so that we can have rain for the crops and whatnot. Then this is a prayer that is prayed, and you'll find that this is prayed in like areas that they need rain, when they need rain. And of course this happens according to the place that people are in. The next thing we see here, the next thing that I'll talk about is going to talk about there's 17 sunnah rakas that follow the times of the obligatory salah. And he says وَسُنَنُ التَّابِعَةُ لِلْفَرَائِضِ 17 رَكَعَةً رَكَعَةَ الْفَجْرِ. And so he says that there's 17. He says rakat al-fajr, which are the two for fajr, وَأَرْبَعٌ قَبْلَ الظُّهْرِ وَرَكَعَتَانِ بَعْدَهُ. And so he says there's arba, there's 4 before dhuhr and 2 after it. And then also he says here وَأَرْبَعٌ قَبْلَ الْعَصْرِ. And so he says, and 4 before asr, وَرَكَعَتَانِ بَعْدَ الْمَغْرِبِ. And then there's 2 rakat after maghrib. And then he says وَثَلَاثٌ بَعْدَ الْعِشَاءِ يُوتِرُ بِوَاحِدَةٍ مِنْهُ. And so he says, and then there's 3 after Isha, and one of them you would making one of them witr. And so these 17 that he brings here, if we were to add them up, this is something we could add a couple of them to it, but there's 10, or we could say 12 that are extra important, which are the 2 rakas before fajr. The Prophet ﷺ, he never used to leave these 2 rakas for whenever he was traveling or anything. These were the ones that he would never leave in any case, like these 2 rakas before fajr. And also he said that these are better than what is than the world and everything that's in them, and that's in the dunya, like the rakat qabl al-fajr. And so like rakat al-fajr is like, it's better than all that is in the dunya and whatnot, of course. So this is something someone should always do their best to always be upon, like making sure that they pray these 2 rakahs before fajr. If somebody, for whatever reason, they come into the masjid and the people are already praying fajr, they pray fajr with them, and then they make these up afterwards. And it's still like, it should be before fajr if you can, but if for whatever reason you're late or something, you can pray it after you've prayed the salat al-fajr. You're allowed to pray this, but there's also no prayer after salat al-fajr like the other time, until after the 15 or 13 minutes after sunrise. There's no prescribed prayer in that time, or any extra prayers that you would pray in that time, unless you're making up something, such as like the rakat al-fajr. In these two rakahs for fajr. And then also he says 4 before dhuhr and 2 after it. And this also comes from a hadith that is mentioned that he used to pray, that the Prophet ﷺ, he used to pray like in 10 salat. And of these that are mentioned are like these 4, or these 4 before dhuhr and 2 after it. And also there's many hadith that talk about these we call them rawatib, which means like these salat that we do all the time, and we stay on it. And of course, if you ever miss it, you can always make it up after that time. So if you come to the masjid, like I was saying there, if you came to the masjid and they're standing in prayer, or you only have time to pray two before dhuhr, then you can make up these after dhuhr. So it's 6 in any time that is within dhuhr. This is still in its time. And so there's 4 before dhuhr and 2 after it, and there's 4 before the 4 before asr here. This is not part of the rawatib, but it's something that is there's a hadith that mentions that this is something that the Prophet ﷺ, he prayed for Allah to forgive the person who prays this. And so, and also he says, in a hadith that it's, I believe it's disputed in somewhat, but man hafidha al-arba'i rakat قبل أربع this is for الظهر. فمن حافظ على 4 ركعات قبل الظهر و4 بعدها حرمه الله على النار. That whoever prays these 4 prayers like these 4 prayers before dhuhr, and also he says in this hadith, and 4 after it, then Allah will make him haram, or like make him haram upon the hellfire. So like the hellfire won't reach him. Of course, this is taking consideration all the other things, and this is so you could also do 4 after dhuhr, as from this hadith. This is also something to add to it. And there's also, of course, 4 before asr. That is also narrated. There's hadith that are narrated when it comes to this, that Allah forgives the person. The Prophet says, sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, rahimallahu imra'an salla qabla al-asri arba'a, that may Allah have mercy on the person who prays for rakas qabla, before asr. And so of course this is something that's narrated here. And of course some people have differences about whether the hadith is necessarily in this particular one. Some people say it's is it authentic or not. But Imam Tirmidhi is the one who narrated it, and he said it's Hasan, which is it's authentic, and Allah knows best. But of course, this is something that is, in general, it's something that's good for someone to do. And then he says these are the 4 before Asr, and these are not a part of the like the 10 or the 12 that are like that someone should keep up on regularly. These are something that someone, if they want to add these to these and the rawatib, then this is something that they can add to it. And of course, anything that they do, they should keep onto it and hold on to it and stay consistent, because the most loved actions to Allah are the ones that are consistent. And then also the 2 after Maghrib, and this is something, and it's also sunnah for the 2 after Maghrib and the 2 before Fajr to pray in the first rak'ah after the Fatiha, to pray Qul ya ayyuhal kafirun, like to pray this at the first rak'ah, and then also Qul huwallahu ahad in the second rak'ah. These are part of the sunnah for both Fajr and Maghrib, as well as the rakat al-tawaf. So after someone prayed tawaf, they would also recite these 2 surahs in this way as well. And then he says 3 after Isha. If he said 2 after Isha, this would be of the rawatib, and then the 1 later is witr. And of course, witr is something that the Prophet ﷺ, he would never leave witr as well. So the ones that he would never leave under any circumstances is like the Fajr and also the witr. These are 2 that he would never leave. And so this is something that, of course, the 2 after Isha, these are a part of the rawatib, which are like that 10 or 12 that someone would pray every single day. And then also the witr is something that they would add to this as well, and this would make it the 3, as he mentioned here. And witr can be anything from 1 to or as however many someone wants to pray. And the Prophet ﷺ, he used to pray 11 for witr, and like normally he would pray 11 rakat, and the last of them would be the witr, and this is for the night prayer. And of course, like some people said, it should only be 11, it shouldn't be more. There's no problem with going more, and because there's no prohibition of going more than that if someone wants. Of course, the Prophet ﷺ, he prayed very long rakat, so when he would pray, he would recite like all of Surah Al-Baqarah in a rakah, or even more in a single rakah. And so and some of it, like his rakahs would be much longer. So if someone wasn't able to hold that and they wanted to do more rakat, and to make each of them shorter so they can do that, there's no problem with that. But the end of it should be witr, and they should always make sure that the end of their salah, whatever it is, should be the witr salah. And I know we're coming towards the end here, but we'll finish up with the last 3 prayers that are highly recommended as well. And he says, وَثَلَاثَةٌ نَوَافِلٌ مُؤَكَّدَاتٌ. And so he says here that there's 3 very highly recommended prayers that are nawafil, which is another word for sunnah. And muakkadat, they're highly recommended. They're very strongly recommended. Salat al-layl. And this is what I was just mentioning here, which is the salat that comes any time in the night. So this is after the time of Isha. After you pray the Isha prayer, this time until the Fajr, all of this time is the time for the Salat al-Layl. And the Prophet ﷺ, he used to pray like the 11 rakat, and he wouldn't go above 11 rakat. This is what the Prophet ﷺ used to do, but he never commanded anyone not to go above it. And of course, if somebody has a reason to do it, or they want to go more than that, there's no problem with that. There's nothing that's prohibiting them from doing that. But of course, if you want to do it like the Prophet ﷺ, then you would have have like you would pray 2 by 2, and then you could pray 2 by 2, and then make each of these rak'ats long. And if you need to sit because of this, there's no problem with that. If you have like a longer time that you want to recite Quran, then there's no problem with sitting. The Prophet ﷺ, when in his older age, he would sit while he was praying the night prayer. Of course, it's better for you to sit and pray the night prayer than to stand for a short period of time and only pray a small bit of it, or to leave it altogether. Of course, like sitting during the recitation, the Prophet ﷺ would sit during the long recitation, and then a little before the end of what he's reciting, he would stand back up, and then he would finish the salah as normal. But this is something, if someone's legs or they have some problems with standing for a long period of time, then they can sit for this. And of course, the recitation of the Quran is one of the best things to do, especially at night. In the night prayer, and this is one of the things that is definitely great for someone to do, and that's a time when nobody else is watching, and this is a time that's special between the person who's praying, and between them and Allah. And then the next thing that he says here after the night prayer is, he says Salatul Duha. And Salatul Duha, as I mentioned here, is that time from the 15 minutes after sunrise, or 13 minutes, as some of the scholars have said, and like 13 minutes after sunrise, until the actual solar noon, until a little before that time. All of that time is Duha. And of course, if someone sits there and prays, or they wait after they prayed Fajr, and they wait in the masjid until that time comes, then this is something that has great reward for them to do. And then they can pray that, or if they want to pray that any time. And the Prophet ﷺ, there's many hadiths that talk about the benefit of praying Salatul Duha. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said that every single joint of like the sons of Adam has like sadaqah or some upon it. Like every single joint needs to there needs to be sadaqah that's made for it. And the person who prays duha, this will account for that sadaqah or that charity for all of these joints. Of course, the blessings that Allah has given us for our bodies and for these joints, that's something that we should always make sure that we give that we show thankfulness for what Allah has given us. And of the ways of doing this is praying these extra prayers, and like duha, if someone prays this, then they've made sadaqah for their joints for that day. And this can be 2. It can be 2 rakats, and this is the least of it is 2, and then however long they want to be. And this is something that's silent. It's the silent prayer. So any prayer that's in the day, for the most part, it's silent. And any prayer that's at the night time or in the Fajr, then in this time when the sun is not out, then it would be out loud that you would recite. And so for the prayer, the duha prayer, it's either 2, or you can go up to 8 if you want. Some people say you can go more than 8. There's nothing that says you can't go more than that, but this is the most that we have that the Prophet ﷺ prayed. And Allah knows best. And if somebody misses their night prayer, then they can pray the duha prayer, and to replace the night prayer. Of course, like the witr, they would pray. This is something that, like, of course, the witr itself, like the one, whether or not they pray this at that time is different. Or if they could just add, if they wanted to pray 12 to make up for the 11 that they normally pray, or whatever they normally pray, they can make up with the duha prayer at that time. And of course, that would be as if they prayed the other prayer. And of course, if they had a reason for that. And then the last of these, he says, and Tarawih. And Tarawih is of course the prayer that is prayed in Ramadan, and this is the congregational prayer that is prayed, and it's normally the way people pray it here is they pray like 8. They pray 8, or they pray like the 4. And then they make a break, and then they pray 4, and then they pray witr after that. That's normally how you'll probably see it in a lot of the masjids. But some of them, they pray more than this, and this is something that's narrated from like the Sahaba, that they would pray the extra, like the 20 some rakats. And so praying that, there's nothing wrong with praying those rakats. It actually, like the Sahaba used to do this, and nobody had an issue with it. And some of the people later, they came and said you can only be 11. And so of course, this is not an issue that anyone should make a big deal about. and like if somebody wants to pray, if someone only wants to pray like the 8, and then other people want to finish it out the 20 something, then this is okay for them to finish out the 20. There's no problem with that. It's not something you would say is bid'ah, because this is something the Sahaba used to do. So this is something that is, and there's no one had any issues with them doing that. And also the Taraweeh was something that the Prophet ﷺ, he did this for a few days in a row while he was praying, while he was praying during the last few nights of Ramadan. He would stand up, and of course he would pray the night prayer in Ramadan, and then people started making him a leader in the prayer. Like they would start their prayer behind him, and so he saw this, and it happened a few nights in a row. And then on I believe it was either the third or the fourth night, when the whole masjid was packed for people to pray with the Prophet ﷺ in the night prayer, and then he didn't come out, and he knew that they were there waiting for him, but he didn't come out to pray with them. And and then after that, like the next day, he told them, he said, I think you probably were waiting for me, so that we could pray the night prayer and whatnot. He said, the reason I didn't do this is because it's like for fear that this would become something that's obligatory upon you, and you wouldn't be able to do it. It would be hard upon you for it to become obligatory. So it's something that the Prophet ﷺ, he left for that reason. I mean, there's a lot of things in like the sunnah that we'll find. The Prophet ﷺ, he wouldn't actually do it, except just a small period of times, but he wouldn't do it because he was scared that it would become something later that would become obligatory onto the people. And of course, this is the mercy of the Prophet ﷺ that he had for the ummah, that he never wanted anything to be hard upon them. So if something was like, it was likely that this thing, if he were to do it, if he thought that it was going to be made obligatory later, then he left it so it wouldn't become obligatory. And of course, like Taraweeh, if it was obligatory, it would be hard on a lot of the people, but this is something that isn't obligatory, but it is something that's good. And later, after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, then Omar, he brought people together to pray Taraweeh behind a single person, and this is reviving a sunnah that was previously there. And this is, of course, because the Prophet ﷺ used to do it, and then he stopped doing it because of the fear that it would become obligatory. Once that fear is gone, when he passed away, then at this point, there's nothing prohibiting us from doing it, like the Taraweeh. And this is what Omar had people pray Taraweeh together, and this is something that is definitely good, and it's also sunnah. Allah Ta'ala a'lam. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.
فلذلك فادع واستقم كما أمرت ولا تتبع أهواءهم وقل آمنت بما أنزل الله من كتاب وأمرت لأعدل بينكم الله ربنا وربكم لنا بيننا وبينكم الله يجمع بيننا وإليه المصير.